Good morning, guys. Standard 11. Today I am going to give you something about your first chapter of Hornbill, The Portrait of Lady, and that was written by the greatest, or we can say one of the greatest reporters, one of the greatest journalists of Indian history, Khushwant Singh. Here he has given an account of his grandmother's. As we all know that the internal connection with the grandparents in our family, that is very much bondage. So here he also gives something extra bondage with his grandmother, and he tries to draw the characteristics of the word. Here there is no picture at all, but here he is trying to give the word pictures of his grandmother, who was very loving, cooperative. But as we all know that in our family, grandmother is very old personality. In the same way, Khushwant Singh's grandmother was very old. Her face was wrinkled, hair was white. And no one can believe that once upon a time it had happened that she was pretty, she was young, and she was looking very beautiful. His grandfather's picture hung above mantelpiece of the drawing room, who wore a big turban, just like other Sardar in Punjab wore turban, having a loose clothes and look at least 100 years old. So most of the person who are very responsible for their family, here Khushwant Singh tried his level best to frame the picture of his grandmother. So now we come to the chapter. My grandmother, like everybody's grandmother, was an old woman. She had been old and wrinkled for the 20 years that I had known her. People said that she had once been young and pretty and had even had a husband, but that was hard to believe, because since last years the writer sees him alone without husband. I am not sure that whether I have seen my grandfather also. So every time grandmother explains the portrait of his grandfather, which was hanging on the wall of the drawing room. My grandfather's portrait hung above the mantelpiece in the drawing room. He wore a big turban and a loose-fitting clothes. His long white beard covered the best part of the chest, and he looked at least 100 years old. He did not look the sort of person who would have a wife or children. His personality, his outward look, that was so handsome that nobody will believe that he had a wife and children also. He looked as if he could only have lots and lots of grandchildren. As for my grandmother being young and pretty, the thought was almost revolting. She often told us of the games she used to play as a child. Here this is the time of explanation, that what type of games nowadays you are playing. Most of the children are not going outside. Most of the children are not playing outdoor games. About, I can say, 95% children are playing with video games and computer games and mobile games. So nowadays the physical strength of the students are worst. But I am talking about myself. I am 50 years old. And when we were just like a kid, we have 24 games within 12 months. And all the games were outdoor games. All the games were outdoor games. So as a matter of fact, we had that much game, that many games, that we could not repeat the game, or we could not stay with the game, with a single game, for more than 15 days, for 2 weeks only. Per month we had 2 games. So here the grandmother explained that what type of games they used to play. That seemed quite absurd and undignified on her part, and treated like the fables of the prophet, she used to tell us. What happened? Nowadays, if your grandfather or grandmother will tell you some stories of their age of youth or their kids' age, then you say, this is not happen. This is not possible. But in fact, it was. She had always been short and fat and slightly bent. Her face was crisscross and wrinkles running from everywhere to everywhere. No, we were certain she had always been as we had known her, old, so terribly old that she could not have grown older, and had stayed at the same age for 20 years. Though writer had seen his grandmother at the same age since last 20 years, she could never have been pretty, but she was always beautiful. She hobbled about the house in the spotless white with the one hand and resting on her waist to balance her stoop, and the other telling the beads of her rosary. Every time she moves in the house, putting one hand on the waist and walking slowly with the bending waist. Her silver locks were scattered untidily over her pale, puckered face. Here, silver locks means the white hair shines just like a silver, and her lips constantly moved in the landscape in the mountains, an expanse of pure white recently breathing peace and contentment. But she was very much satisfied with her life. My grandmother and I were good friends. In every family, this happens, that the grandchildren are the good friend of the grandparents. And ultimately I can say, or as there is a proverb, that the old age is the second childhood. Every time the grandparents are attracted to their grandchildren. My parents left me with her when they went to live in the city, and we were constantly together. She used to wake me up in the morning and get me ready for school. She said her morning prayer in a monotonous sing-song while she bathed and dressed me, in the hope that I would listen and get to know it by heart. This shows the exchanging of culture from old age to the new one, old age to the kids, old age to the child. This is the transformation of culture. I hope you have seen or not, I am not sure, but in Jainism I have seen very frequently that the grandfather always takes his grandchild to Jain Derasar early in the morning, hold his hand, and it is habituated that he should or one should go to the temple for the prayer. Your grandparents also try to teach about your culture, about your religion, about the prayer early in the morning, reciting early in the morning. Then she would fetch my wooden slate, which she had already washed and plastered with yellow chalk. Here Khushwant Singh discuss about the time of 70 years before, when the students went to the school with wooden slate. She had already washed and plastered with yellow chalk a tiny earthen ink pot and a red pen, tied with them all in a bundle and hand it to me. After breakfast of thick stale chapati, which with a little butter and sugar spread on it, we went to school. She carried several stale chapatis with her for the village dogs. Yes, she is always ready to do some donation with the dogs.